Sometimes you're reading the Bible and a Bible verse just jumps off the page at you and you're like, that was so good. That is my favorite time to verse map. Today, let's talk all about how to verse map. It's been a couple years since I've made a video about this and my skill set around verse mapping has totally changed, and it's definitely a skill that you have to practice and learn. And so today I'm going to talk to you all about how to verse map. Let's begin. Hey Bible nerds, welcome back. Today, this is a highly requested video. It's been a couple years since I've made a verse mapping video, and I've grown a lot in how to verse map, how to do it well. It started all the way back like a year or two ago where I was verse mapping one verse a day, and it would take me about an hour, but I really wanted to hone in on my verse mapping skills because verse mapping uses a bunch of different Bible study skills. When you verse map, you're going to use like the skill of like knowing how to use translations. You're going to use the skill of how to do a word study. You're going to get better at your skills of like understanding context. Verse mapping includes some of the biggest Bible study skills there are. And so I wanted to prioritize that. And that slowly morphed into me doing very regular verse mapping videos on my Patreon. And so if you're a patron, you guys know every other week I post a in-depth verse mapping study on Patreon. We verse map a verse, and those are some of my favorite studies. It's like you take a really deep dive into a book in a verse, and they're always so fruitful, and do a lot of worksheets with them, and you guys can join Patreon and verse map along with me if you'd like. But today I wanted to share some of like the major skills and like mistakes that I see in verse mapping that aren't like mistakes as in like, oh, Jesus no longer loves you because you made that verse mapping mistake, but more so like you're gonna miss the richness if you don't do X, Y, and Z. So first off, you need to know the way that I verse map is 3 steps. First, you look at context, then you look at translations, and then you go word by word, line by line. In that order is very important. I think a lot of people get excited about doing a word study and knowing that ancient Greek or Hebrew word. It feels cool. It feels nerdy. You guys know, y'all literally call us here the Bible nerds, so y'all get it. But we can't truly do a faithful word study without first understanding context. So we have to start with context. And you might be like, Faith, how do you do that? It honestly looks different with every single Bible verse. So Siri, pick a random Bible verse. Psalm 127:1, which reads, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain." All right, so we're gonna use this verse as our example verse today. What I'm first gonna do is I'm gonna open up my Bible to Psalm 127, and I'm going to scan over the whole Psalm because context includes like paragraph and chapter and book and author and historical situation. Context is very like a huge topic. And if I'm gonna be honest with you guys, context is where I spend most my time when I'm verse mapping. At least half your time when you're verse mapping should be spent on context. All right, so we're flipped open to Psalm 127. Up here, it's a really short Psalm. I definitely wanna scan it over really quick and read it. Make sure I understand themes and like the main message of this Psalm. You guys can see that I have like notes on it, notes about it sounding like wisdom literature. It's labeled as a song of ascent, which means it's a psalm sung as a pilgrim to Jerusalem to celebrate the religious feasts and festivals. So that's going to tell me about the use, and like that information you can find in like a Bible dictionary. That's why it's so important to have Bible dictionaries. Y'all know I have, oh, you guys can't see them. I have a ton. These are the main 2 that I kind of just like out of habit use, but I also have Zondervan here, Holman, and Nelson. If you don't have a Bible dictionary, get yourself one. It's worth it. That's why I have like 6. Now you might have noticed my crew neck. Maybe you didn't, but you should. This is by that brand I always talk about, Caruso. This is that brand I've loved for decades. Y'all know I've said this before. I remember being like 12 and spending my allowance money on Caruso shirts. I was just so inspired by their mission and desire to share the good news. If you don't know, Caruso is a Greek word which means to preach, herald, proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. And that is their mission. So they make millions of products. I got my sweater and my water bottle here today as I film. This one says, "Sow kindness, reap joy." And their objective is to create those gospel conversations. You know, recent studies show that 78% of Christians haven't shared their faith. I know. Why not use something like a t-shirt to break that barrier? If we're gonna buy clothes, if we're gonna put on clothes, why not put on the truth of Christ and wear the truth of Christ for the world to see, preaching the gospel to the nations like we're called to. So shop my link down below and use this code for 15% off. They've been super gracious with us in the past, and they continue to be as we prep for the holidays. I think I might be gifting some Caruso stuff. And thank you to Caruso for sponsoring this video so we can all grow in verse mapping. Now let's get back to the video. reading over this psalm, I'm going to see that it's a psalm attributed to Solomon, hence wisdom and the influence of wisdom. Like I said, it's a song of ascent. It seems like there's a theme of vanity, like things just being like pointless if it's not unto the Lord. And it seems to be focused on the blessings of belonging to God and not the world. So that's looking at the context of the psalm. We understand a little bit of how it was used contextually in the ancient Near East as a song of ascent, singing as a pilgrim towards Jerusalem. We understand a little bit of the themes, but I could also go to a commentary and look at their rough contextual information around this chapter. Typically, commentaries will do that whenever they're opening up to a new section of a book of the Bible or a new chapter. They'll kind of give you an overview of like what's going on here in this section of scripture. It all depends on the way that that commentary is outlining that particular section of scripture. But like for a psalm, they're going to basically do that for each and every psalm and then for each book of the Psalms. Because if you don't know, the book of Psalms in the Bible is broken down into 5 books. I'm like, that's a rabbit trail for another day. But like each of the 5 books have different themes and focuses in a big picture. And then each psalm obviously has contextual information as well. So I'm just going to like grab a quick commentary and just see if they have anything else to note here, like something that I couldn't see just off first glance. Sometimes there's a word that's repeated that you can't see because it's not repeated in English, but it's repeated in Hebrew. Or sometimes there's like a chiasm, like a literary element of like parallelism or poetry, some kind of literary element, metaphor, whatever. Like they're going to be able to point out those things which might super apply to our particular verse. So I have like 2 favorites. My 2 favorite commentaries on the Psalms are out right now because I study a psalm in depth on my Patreon every single week. My 2 favorite commentaries in the Psalms are the New International Commentary on the Old Testament and the ESV expository. But if you are a beginner and you don't have any commentaries, I would like highly recommend the Tyndale, which is like this short book stack here. Their volumes on the Psalms, it's just 2 volumes. It's just going to be more beginner friendly, but as you can see, each psalm has a paragraph of like contextual information. Let's see about Psalm 127. Okay, it looks like they give us a good outline for this psalm, and they also spend a little bit of time talking about how it's a wisdom psalm. A wisdom psalm is defined as one that provides instruction on right living and right faith in the tradition of other wisdom writings. Its theme is found in the first verse of the psalm, a house, a rich word in biblical Hebrew. In the past, a number of scholars suggested that this psalm was composed of 2 distinct proverbial sayings, which would be in verses 1 and 2 and then verses 3 and 5. But most recent scholars, however, argue for the original integrity of the psalm. Interesting. That's the kind of context stuff that your girl needs. I need to understand that the wisdom here is thick. I need to understand the metaphor of a house, and I need to understand that there's some debate about this just being 2 proverbial sayings that are now connected into one psalm. Although they don't take that view, I want to know that scholars once argued that because it helps me understand just how distinct the 2 sections are. So that's just some contextual information that I got like right here from the Nikot. But let's look at the ESV. The basic theme of this wisdom psalm is that without the Lord's blessing, all human toil is worthless. Okay, wait, let me just say this. This is a rabbit trail though a little bit. You might be disappointed when you read that commentary said like a theme and a metaphor, main focus is the house. And then here they say the theme is without the Lord's blessing, all human toil is worthless. Do not get discouraged when you come across many different mixed themes and metaphors. They all are there. They all inform multiple different angles of how to look at a text. So don't be discouraged when like commentaries say differing POVs on a text. That actually makes your POV richer. So they kind of connect Psalm 127 with 128. They say it is possible that the word house in verse 1, although meant physical, also anticipates the household or family, which would make more sense of like the second half of this psalm. And in Song of Ascents, perhaps the house of the Lord. Because like we said, the Song of Ascents means that they're traveling towards Jerusalem for the feasts and festivals, which means that their eyes focused on temple worship. That is really important context that was so worth our journey through these 2 commentaries. You can never exhaust contextual information that you can get from it, but it's always worth the time that you put into it. We could spend 5 more hours and get even more context, but I think this is a good stopping point. Plus, we've been filming for a while now. Let me put these up. All right, now that we looked at context, we're gonna look at translations. And what I like to do is I like to go to Bible Hub and I just type in our verse and then Bible Hub like into Google. So Psalm 127, 1, Bible Hub. We're just setting the fall mood over her. Okay, so Psalm 127, 1, Bible Hub. All right, now right straight away we see that that's a horrible accent. Forgive me. Forgive me. There are all the translations right here on this side of the screen. What is that? Left. We see all different translations here. Now I'm just gonna be frank with you. I ignore most of them. I'm looking at like the 10 most popular. I'm gonna look at the KJV, the NKJV, the NIV, the ESV, the NLT, the RSV, the NASB, the CSB, the NET. I'll look at the Amplified. That's like it. I'm gonna look at the most popular 10, and you wanna keep in mind the spectrum of Bible translations. Remember, there are translations more on the end that are translating like thought for thought. They really want you to get the right idea across. And there's other translations that are translating more word for word. Both have their place, but you really wanna strike a good balance between them. So I read the ESV, another kind of middle ground one would be NIV. I'll reference the NKJV and the NLT. I pop all around the spectrum of Bible translations, and that's what we really kind of want to do here. We're going to read through these, and one, you're reading the Bible verse over and over and over again, so new things are going to stick out to you. Through the various different translations, they might use like a different word that makes it make more sense or less sense. And you're also going to look for where do all of them tend to disagree, or like where do all of them tend to differentiate? Where do all of them tend to say a different thing? That's what you actually want to look for. Sometimes there won't be like barely any differences. It will be like what I say as tiny words, like is, are, but, like those aren't huge differences. We're looking for the big differences, big words that truly change the way we understand the text. So I'm gonna scan through here and see what I can find. Unless the Lord builds the house, unless the Lord builds the house, unless the Lord builds the house, it seems like all of them kind of agree on that. The builders labor in vain. The work of builders is wasted. The builders labor in vain that build it. Ooh, unless the Lord protects the city, unless the Lord keeps the city, unless the Lord watches over the city. There's some kind of verb here in the Hebrew that they're struggling to properly translate, probably because Hebrew especially has a lot of nuance to it. It depends on the situation and the context of the words used that really you can translate it. And so I definitely am going to want to look at that word that they're differing over. So let's go now. We're going to move into step 3, which is word for word, line by line, like doing word studies through this verse. So we've looked at context, then we looked at translations, and now step 3, we're going to look and do word studies. So on Bible Hub, right underneath the number for the verse, they have where it says like Hebrew, or it'll say Greek if you're in the New Testament. You click on that Hebrew and it'll jump you down. It's just the same page, but this is an interlinear Bible where you have Hebrew and English lined up together. And so we can see, unless Yahweh builds the house, its builders labor in vain, unless the Lord. Here is that verb that all of them are disagreeing over. Yizmar. No, it's a shamar. Oh, this is shamar. This is a popular word that's used a lot in the Psalms and the Bible. To keep, to watch, preserve. It can mean to defend, to guard, to maintain. So what I did here, I just looked for the word that they all disagreed with. And I'm going to click on the Strong's number. Y'all know I've talked about Strong's a lot. Strong's is a reference number. It's like the gold standard of reference numbers in the biblical world for referencing a Greek or Hebrew word. And the Strong's Concordance will give you a definition and where else it has been used. And you can see every other way that it's been translated through the Bible. You can see it's been translated as observe, keep, beware, take heed. There's all kinds of ways that this word has been translated because Hebrew had a lot of nuance to it. And that's why all these Bible translations are differing on how to translate this exact word or verb. Now, I'm just gonna let you know, one of the big things you wanna look for whenever you're looking at these words is see if they are included anywhere else in that book of the Bible or by that author. Sometimes Paul has like certain words he likes to use over and over again. And that's really telling to like what he had in mind, where else he used that word and said similar things about it. And then other times he'll use really unique words that are only unique to that book of the Bible or used in some certain specific way. Doing a word study can also lead you down many rabbit trails of like, oh wow, it's used another place in this chapter, another place in this book. This specific word is used so much throughout the Old Testament, but nowhere else in this Psalm. So I'm not gonna super worry about it. I could, however, if I had the time for it, I could go down the rabbit trail of looking where else it is in the wisdom Psalms, like from Solomon, and then where else it is in the Psalms of Ascent. But I don't really feel like it's gonna be worth it, so I'm not gonna do that today. And then another thing I'm gonna wanna look for is any kind of repetition or literary elements through the verse. So here in this verse, we see vain is repeated. Something is in vain. Something is in vain. And this is partly because it's using this literary element of parallelism, but it's nonetheless that's still repetition. So what we're gonna wanna do is do a word study on that one as well. This is Strong's 7723, shav, and it means empty or vanity, deceitful, false, falsehood, worthless. And this word is so particular, so telling, so thematic that I'm gonna wanna see where else it was used in scripture. So remember, it's on that right-hand side of the screen. I see it's used a ton through Job and twice in verse 1 of this Psalm and then another time in verse 2. And I'm just checking, but yeah, I don't see it in Ecclesiastes at all. And that's because the word in Ecclesiastes that's used for vanity is hevel, but I just was curious to see if this synonym was there, and it's not. So that's interesting. It doesn't tie it as tightly to that wisdom stereotype that I had for it and that the commentaries acknowledged for it. It would be really interesting if it was the same word, but it's not. Speaking of commentaries, one of them mentioned, I think it was the ESV expository, that the word for house used could reference temple. So let's go double check them. We don't want to just believe everything a commentary says. Now, this word is Strong's Hebrew 1004, bayith, and it means a house, temple, shrine. I'm gonna once again look at the other places where it's been used and see if it's used for temple much, especially in wisdom literature and in the Psalms. And it does seem to have correlation or reference to the temple, though it's loose and not super common to be translated as something other than house. Now, this is a super simple walkthrough of how I would start to verse map this verse, but you're really never done verse mapping because you can always discover so much more. You could go into a Bible dictionary and look up any understandings around a house or a watchman or vanity. You could read commentaries and see if they notice things that we don't notice. But if you want to hear more about how to interpret the Bible well, how to be faithful to the Bible and not take it out of context, I think you'll definitely enjoy this video right here. I'll see you guys in that video. Bye guys.